Hello, everyone. Welcome to Belong to the Future, where we explore the intersections of climate change, education, children, and the future of our planet. I'm your host, Megha Chaturvedi, and today we have a truly inspiring guest joining us. Before I introduce her, I would like to share that many of us experience climate anxiety as we confront the realities of a warming world. And understanding this emotional impact is crucial. And therefore, I'm really thrilled to introduce our guest, who is pioneering the field of climate psychology and helping us navigate these challenges. Leslie Davenport is a trailblazer in the field of climate psychology, bridging the gap between mental health and environmental awareness. With over 25 years of medical experience, she's a founding member of the Institute for Health and Healing, one of America's largest integrative medicine programs. Leslie's unique approach emphasizes empowerment and collaboration, helping communities navigate the emotional challenges posed by our changing climate. But that's not all. Her work has culminated in several impactful publications, including Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change, and her latest book, What to Do When Climate Change Scares You, A Kid's Guide to Dealing with the Climate Change Stress. Leslie actively supports children and youth by providing incredible tools to understand and cope with the emotional impacts of climate change. Her contributions to organizations like Project Inside Out and the Climate Mental Health Network further highlights her commitment to fostering resilience in the face of environmental challenges. There is so much more that I can keep going on. Leslie is a wonderful, wonderful human being and a psychologist who's deeply passionate about supporting young adults and children around the mental aspects of climate change. I'm thrilled to have Leslie on the show today to discuss her innovative approaches to climate psychology and the importance of emotional resilience. So, without further ado, let's welcome Leslie Davenport. Thank you, Leslie, for taking our time and coming on the podcast. I'm sure the listeners are going to learn as much as I'm looking forward to hear from your rich experience and understanding of the role of psychology into interdisciplinary efforts that advance creative and effective solutions for climate change. So, once again, thank you so much for taking our time for the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Amazing. Before I move to a question and answer segment, Leslie, where I have a host of questions that I've listed down and would love to hear your perspectives on, I would like to kick things off with a rapid fire round. I'll ask you a series of quick questions, and I would want you to respond with the first thing, word, phrase that comes to your mind. I hope that is something that we can do.
Let's give it a try.
Awesome. Leslie, here we go. The first question is, what's the one word that comes to your mind when you think of climate change?
Possibilities.
Interesting. Who's your favorite climate action hero?
Well, I know this is brief, but I have to say a little more about this. I'm going to say each kid that I work with because I think hero is a tricky word when it comes to this. We don't want to separate it out as only certain kinds of people have a role to play, but helping each kid find their contribution and become a hero is really exciting way to approach it.
Wow, what a novel way to look at this question. I really like that answer. When you think of climate change, what comes to your mind? Hope or fear?
Truly, truly, my answer is both. And I think we'll have a chance to dive into that a little more deeply.
Yeah. What inspires you most about the youth today?
I would say their passion, a
Mhm.
willingness to look with eyes wide open to what's happening and be involved in participating.
Interesting. The last question in this segment is a positive trend in climate action that you've noticed, with the kind of work that you're doing and the people that you work with. Anything that comes to your mind?
Yes, I think the fact that the opportunities and awareness is growing. So it's not just a few nonprofit organizations, it's coming into the schools in certain areas, it's coming into communities. And so it's opening up a lot of possibilities for ways to get involved.
Yeah, and I think we will speak about it in our segment, but and that's also sort of like how you use the word possibility, right? There's so much
Yes.
potential for improvement. The canvas is white and empty. Love those answers. Without further ado, let's have your thoughts on a few questions that I'd really want to have listen from you on. So, Leslie, my first question, I was sort of reading this. There's a report by Yale Program for Climate Communication which says 1 in 10 young people say they have recently felt depressed over their concerns for the planet, and a similar percentage describe feeling on edge or like they're unable to stop worrying about global warming. And all of us have read that climate anxiety is truly real. So many people are becoming more and more aware of the threat, whether through actual disasters, media reports, or the global climate movement. And children's responses vary from worry to hope. Given the developing field of climate psychology, how can we help children and young adults cope with climate stress?
Boy, yeah, that really gets to the heart of things. Well, the first thing I want to say is when we're supporting children and honestly adults too, this is applicable really to all ages,
Mm-hmm.
that there are two areas we focus on, and I call them internal strategies and external strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Internal strategies are things like acknowledging the feelings, helping kids talk about it, process it. Maybe there's art experiences. And then there are really specific tools that come from psychology. I'm going to give you one concrete example. Is sometimes for kids who have really persistent worries and it's on their mind all the time, we encourage them to have what's called a worry time. And let me explain what that means. So it might be pick a time every day, maybe after school in the afternoon or before dinner, when you sit down, you write, you look things up on the computer, you talk to someone if that's an option, but it's timed. So there might be 30 minutes of I'm worried about this and this is why and these are my other feelings about it. I feel sad, I feel angry. And then when the bell goes off, there's a kind of closure, and maybe there's a breathing practice or something to help shift the focus and encouragement to go out and play or do homework or whatever's next. And what's helpful about this is not just validating that these feelings
Mm-hmm.
are reasonable, understandable, real, but all the rest of the time, when it's 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock, if the child begins to worry, they say to themselves, I don't have to do this now. I'm going to wait until tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And it's a way of a kind of mental discipline to not try and get rid of feelings that can't get rid of, but to contain it in a way that doesn't spread out into all aspects of their life. And it's something that, when practiced over time, it actually develops mental habits, even new neural networks in the brain that help this become much more manageable. So that's the internal strategies part and examples of that. And then external strategies are helping kids find ways to participate in the change that needs to happen. So this might be doing a school project that is educational about ocean conservation, or joining a community group where kids are part of planting trees. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be almost anything as long as it aligns with the child's interests, concerns, talents, and to just feel that they matter and that they can make a difference.
Very interesting, Leslie. And I think I'm still sort of hooked onto the worry time concept because that's something that I've never heard before, and I'm going to include that in my routine because I think it's such a
Mm,
constructive way to deal with anxiety, right? It doesn't really
yes,
spill over throughout the day, but it's just very focused way or very
yes.
constructive way. And light of what you just said, I would want to ask you, what are the potential long term mental health implications for children growing up in a world where climate change is an ever present future, right? And you touched upon it very briefly. How do you think, what can be these implications if this is not sort of handled or arrested?
Yes. Well, there are some very real concerns of how it impacts a variety of vulnerable populations. Children are certainly one. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So there's now a link between, for example, high levels of air pollution and brain development. There are links between high levels of heat and high levels of anxiety, depression, even aggressiveness
Mm-hmm.
in children and adults. And of course, the impacts of climate change can look like many, many things, right? If there's a flood, if there's a fire, the impact of living through that, whether it's the losses directly or having to evacuate and this sense of unsafety about being in the world. So I think it's really important to highlight in very specific ways. This is not a theoretical thing. This is not something that's happening somewhere to some people. This is a growing threat, and many, many people are, of course, impacted now. And that's only going to increase because until this is really addressed thoroughly, the impacts are on the rise.
Yeah, and I think these are very conspicuous manifestations because we generally do not think of a climate change effect really having those kind of manifestations in somebody's life. And if these are touching the psyche of children in this manner, I think it's alarming. That makes me think, given parents are often the biggest influencers for children and young adults, what advice would you give to parents who are unsure how to talk to their children about climate change without overwhelming them about it?
Yes, what a wonderful question. So, it's very natural, especially with parents, and I see this in some teachers, school teachers as well,
Mm-hmm.
that we really want to protect the kids as best we can from fears and dangers. And that can tempt us to not want to talk about something that's scary, like climate change. Problem with that is that kids are learning about it anyway, experiencing it anyway, hearing bits and pieces about it anyway. And unless there's this open forum where they can ask questions, they can be reassured, they can feel that they're joined with their family who cares about this too and is working to make things safer and better, they really are much more at risk of living with fears that the parents may not even realize that they have. And let me give you an example of something that I had come up in a child I was working with. So there was a child who was very distressed and crying and scared. And after some exploration, I came to learn that she was afraid to go to sleep at night because she had seen part of a news story on the television about a city that had experienced a flood. What she didn't know is that what she saw on TV was hundreds of miles away. And that, for right now, that was not a risk she had to worry about. And yet, without a place to bring her worries and having this inaccurate information, she was highly distressed. And
Mm-hmm.
so, one of the things that can come from, I want to hear your interests, I want to hear your questions, I want to hear your concerns. Let's be in this together. That's really the message we want to create so that kids feel comfortable and open to bring these things forward. And then there can be solutions, whether it's reassurances emotionally and or being part of change that families can do together, because it really, really matters to kids what their parents value. And if parents say, I may not have all the answers, but this is a very important topic to me too. Let's do this together.
Mm-hmm.
Kids find that very reassuring.
And I love that perspective, Leslie, because I think that's something that perhaps goes missing in a lot of families. It's because either the parents or perhaps the teachers as well are not as exposed to the manifestations of climate change themselves, but to have these open conversations with their child anyways sort of helps them look at it with a lot of hope rather than with a lot of fear. And when I was reading about your profile, and there's a workbook that you've done which says what to do when climate change scares you, a kid's guide to dealing with climate change stress. So beyond community, which is your immediate family, your teachers, or your community neighborhood in general, I think literature or books have a big role to play to shape the psyche of children. How do you think use of such evidence-based activities and practices along with approachable illustrations and language that's there in the workbook helps distill this complicated topic of climate change for the young minds?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, this book just came out, and I'll mention that it's published through the American Psychological Association. And honestly, it is a really helpful workbook for parents and teachers too,
Hmm.
because even though it's age appropriate for kids to read and do the exercises and the drawings, it is very much step by step. So if parents aren't sure how to approach it, it's going to guide them as well. And it can be something they can talk about together, do together. And let me describe briefly a little bit of what's inside the book. So it starts with three hearts, and kids are asked to either write or draw in each of the hearts. And the first heart is a question of what do you love about nature and the natural world? And it could be anything from swimming in the ocean or eating a fresh piece of fruit or hiking or anything that they love, gardening with their grandparents, anything. The second one is what have you heard about climate change? What are you curious about? What would you like to know more about? And then the third one is are there any worries or concerns about it? And so the rest of the book goes back and revisits these three things. And so it's able to be very specific to the child. So later on, they revisit the first heart and they work with nature and they go deeper into building their connection with the natural world. The second one, what are they curious about? That gets articulated in very specific ways. And then how to find out those answers with caregivers, with parents at the school library, with reliable sources. And then the third one about what their worries are, ways to work with thoughts and feelings. So let me give you another example. The worry hour we talked about is in there, or the worry time.
Mhm.
But there's also this maze, this drawing little game that kids do. And it starts with you are here, and they have to work their way through the maze to a safer, healthier world for all. And along the path are helpful thoughts like one step at a time, we are stronger together. But there are also dead ends that say things like it's all up to me. It's too big for me to make a difference. And so it uses these concepts from psychology, but makes it, in this case, almost playful and
Mhm.
relatable as kids work their way through.
Very interesting, and I think I can't wait to lay my hands on the workbook already, Leslie. I wish I can order that in India already. And I think it approaches climate change awareness, like you said, as a playful, a two-way approach rather than as a diktat. And that leads me to ask you this question. When I was reading your bio, and that's something very interesting that came up, was the fact that you integrate social science insights into relevant resources for organizations as well to explore the intersectionality of climate, economics, education, so on and so forth. Could you share more about your work and how is that aiding the cause?
Yes. So one thing that we've haven't really articulated directly, let me start with this, is that any feelings that get triggered about climate change, we've talked a lot about the fear and anxiety or worry,
Mhm.
but also frustration or anger that maybe governments haven't acted more quickly to respond in ways that would be helpful. or sadness at some of the losses that are occurring. All of those are really natural. We human beings came into this world with these feelings for a reason. And I'm not saying that we're meant to move through this world upset all the time, but we can't really get rid of something like fear because it's telling us pay attention if there's threats or risks or there's questions about safety. But rather than just staying in the feeling, that's how it can be a fuel for action. So, what can I do to help make the world safer?
Mm.
Or if there's frustration or anger, how can I be a part of supporting community or civic or policy making decisions that would support this healthier, safer world for all? So my work has, as you described, has gone in so many directions
Yeah.
because this is such an emerging understanding of how important it is to bring our human experience into the challenges of this work. So sometimes I'm asked, for example, to work with climate journalists, climate scientists, people who work in environmental organizations, because they are very, very aware of what's happening to our world, but without necessarily having any support about what it's like to know that. Or I'm being invited to come into schools so that as climate science is starting to be introduced, we also add some of these things you and I've been speaking of, how to support kids with the feelings so that it's not just scary news, but to support that sense of hopefulness and involvement. And to train the mental health field too, because at least in the US, and I'm not aware of any place globally, none of the mental health field is yet required to be trained in what you and I are describing. So I do also a lot of training for the mental health field to be prepared to work with these feelings. And supporting youth activists, it really is sort of endless
Mhm.
in the ways, given that our human emotions are going to travel with us in whatever ways we're aware of and involved in these sustainability efforts.
Yeah, and I think you truly said that, Leslie. The canvas is wide and limitless, and the kind of work that's there ahead of us demands us to not look at it with a singular lens, but there is so much that you can do around climate action with different streams and with different rounds of functions.
Yes.
And I think you touched on something very important when you said fuel for action. I think I'm hinging on that phrase. And I would love to sort of ask you, how do we balance teaching children about the realities of climate change while nurturing a mindset that balances hope with the urgency to act, right? Would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yes. One thing that's really helpful, it's very easy to focus on what's wrong, and the
Hmm.
dangers. And it's certainly important to be educated and keep our eyes open to that. But there's also a lot of good work happening, organizations that are making headway, the rise in renewable energies, the number of people that are growing in awareness and wanting to find a way to be involved. So, one way to help balance it is to make sure that not only we're looking at climate impacts, but we're looking at climate improvements. And it's interesting the way our brain works from an evolutionary point of view. We're sort of programmed to tune in more to the threats and the dangers because that's part of our survival mechanism.
Yes.
And the things that are scary or dangerous register with us as much as 5 times more strongly than good news.
Hmm.
So we have to go out of our way to make sure that we learn about the people, the organizations, the places that are making this headway. And it's honestly one of the ways to balance it. And then the other thing I'd say is that's not the only thing happening, right? So we need to continue to enjoy this beautiful world that we
Yeah.
have, to love it, which is what will motivate us to be part of wanting to protect it. And so I think that, along with some of the things we talked about, like containing our worries, being part of change, are ways to sustain the balance.
Interesting. Leslie, I would want to ask you, what psychological benefits do children really gain when they engage in climate action? How can then these actions empower them in the long term? What, because now we are moving from fear to hope to, having
Yes.
them take active part in the climate action. So what are these psychological benefits that you see children really have?
Well, you used a really important word here, which is empowerment. I think any time for children and adults that we feel like what we say, what we do, our contribution matters,
Mm-hmm.
it's very hopeful, it's very uplifting, it's very empowering. The things that pull us down into things like depression or chronic upset are if we feel overwhelmed and nothing matters and there's nothing I can do and I'm too small to make a difference. And in all the strategies we've been talking about of being a part of change and seeing other people who are doing this as well, and it uplifts us through practical empowerment, it really has tremendous mental health benefits.
Very valid. As we conclude the sort of episode, Leslie, I would want to understand what's your hope for the future regarding climate education and the role of children?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I feel like we've been addressing it, which is this growing awareness and growing opportunities to be a part of change. And not just let's stop bad things from happening, but really envisioning, well, what is possible to make the world better, fairer, safer, healthier? It can actually be kind of exciting to be part of transformative possibilities, but in a way that's very grounded in let's come together and be creative and apply our creative resources to this change. So I would say, if you're hearing this and this is of interest to you and exciting, but you're not aware yet of something in your area or your school where the kids may be, raise the topic. Maybe see what can be started. Connect with other parents who may share this interest, and that there's tremendous power that can come from this occurring from, seedlings like this, initial efforts to grow into something really flourishing.
I'm loving every word that you're saying, Leslie. And I think one emotion that I'm taking back from this conversation is change starts from me, right? From every individual. And
Yes.
once we start it at home, our immediate environment, I think there is so much more that can be done. But I think that first step comes from you, right? I would love to say that thank you for your passion and commitment to this important cause. And once again, I really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us and for all the valuable perspectives that you've shared. Loved it, and I think our listeners will also gain so much out of it. So thank you, Leslie, once.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.